Welcome to The Explainer. Okay, today we're unpacking a story that basically injects a workplace comedy with just a delightfully chaotic dose of romantic tension. We're exploring what happens when your professional life and your messy personal history crash head-on. It's a fascinating look at avoidance, communication, and honestly, the comedic timing of the universe.
I want you to really think about this for a second. What would you do if you showed up for your very first day at a brand new job, knocked on the front door, and realized your new clients were not one, not two, but three of your exes? Crazy, right? It establishes this absolutely cringe-inducing, high-stakes premise that instantly hooks you.
Now, to really get the mechanics of this story, we've got to talk about the genre. This material plays heavily with the harem trope. If you're not familiar, that's a narrative setup where a single protagonist is surrounded by multiple romantic interests. But here's the brilliant twist. This story turns the dial all the way up to 11. Why? Because these three ex-girlfriends aren't just random women. They're literally sisters living under the exact same roof.
No way.
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. The awkward premise. So, meet Kento Yosha. He's a 25-year-old housekeeper. And look, he's incredibly good at his job. But crucially, he's also incredibly shy and, honestly, super conflict avoidant. For him, housekeeping is perfect. It lets him work quietly and avoid messy social interactions. Right? Well, that is until a severe staffing shortage forces his agency to reassign him to the Ogawa household. He walks in just hoping to do his job and walks straight into his own past.
Moving right along to Section 2, profiling the three exes.
Let's map out Kento's bizarre dating history for a second. In high school, he dated Sia. Then, at age 20, he dated Lisa. And a bit later on in adulthood, he dated Maria. Now, the one saving grace for Kento here is that none of these relationships actually overlapped. So he's in a two-timer. He's just a guy with incredibly specific, albeit completely accidental, taste.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the fundamental miscommunication that doomed his high school romance with Sia. On one side, we have Kento's assumption. He just figured Sia didn't like him anymore, so he preemptively pulled away, to save face. But on the flip side, we see Sia's reality. She felt like Kento was constantly putting up emotional walls, and because neither of them actually talked about it, they drifted apart, leaving all these years of unresolved tension.
Then we shift to Maria, the brilliant comic book artist. There's this quote from Kento. "I loved you just as much as I loved your comics." And man, it perfectly encapsulates their dynamic. See, Kento started dating Maria after being a huge fan of her work. He supported her when she was really struggling. But in a classic display of avoidant behavior, the very moment her comic series got picked up and became successful, he pulled away. He incorrectly assumed he was going to hold her back, never actually realizing that she wanted his continued support right by her side.
And finally, we have Lisa. They met when he was 20. She essentially wore him down with just relentless flirting. But when Kento was asked to transfer to a different location, his fear of conflict totally flared up again. He suggested breaking up over the distance. But secretly, he was hoping she'd stop him. He wanted her to fight for the relationship, but she didn't know that, and so another relationship ended simply because of things left unsaid.
Which brings us to Section 3, fleeing the past. You can imagine this close proximity creates some overwhelming awkwardness in the house. And it all culminates in a highly competitive birthday celebration. Lisa jumps in first with a gift. Maria immediately one-ups her by handing over this incredibly expensive chef's knife. Meanwhile, Sia, who really struggles the most with vulnerability, she misses her chance entirely. Basically, the house turns into a battlefield of affection, and Kento is just completely overwhelmed by the whole shebang.
So, predictably, Kento's deeply ingrained conflict-avoidant nature kicks right into high gear. Just as the tension is peaking, his boss calls with news. They finally found the female replacement the Ogawas originally asked for, which means Kento is being reassigned. Now, does he sit the sisters down and explain? Of course not. He abruptly announces it's his last day, leaves without any real closure, and just retreats to the safety of his old clients. But almost immediately, he's haunted by memories of the sisters. He deeply, deeply regrets his choice to run away yet again.
Section 4. A fortunate accident. Back at the office, Kento is visibly depressed. He's pulling that classic asking for a friend routine. But his boss, Ron, sees right through it and drops this absolute truth bomb. You're just scared of getting hurt. And wow, that is a vital realization, because this story isn't really about a guy juggling three women. It's actually about a guy who is profoundly terrified of emotional vulnerability.
But hey, knowing you're scared and actually doing something about it, those are two very different things. It takes a massive shock to finally jolt Kento into action. Out of nowhere, he receives this frantic, out-of-context phone call from Lisa. She's completely panicking, claiming there's been an accident involving Sia. Kento's protective instincts completely override all of his anxiety, and he immediately sprints back to the Ogawa household, terrified for her safety.
He bursts into the house, expecting some huge medical emergency, only to find out, well, Sia isn't hurt at all. She just accidentally scraped the bumper of the car while parking. Seriously, it's a minor property damage issue, not a broken bone. But the beauty of this comedic twist is what it reveals. Kento's panicked, breathless arrival proves, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that he genuinely cares about them. His actions finally speak way louder than his fears.
All right, Section 5, communication is key.
So Kento and Sia finally sit down to talk about high school. Instead of assuming the worst, they actually ask each other what went wrong. Sia emphasizes how much Kento's early acceptance meant to her. She says, "You told me I was cool for being honest and straightforward. That's when I fell for you." Other guys usually liked her for her looks and bolted when they found her personality too harsh, but Kento loved her straightforwardness. By clearly communicating this and explaining how his emotional walls hurt her, direct communication finally breaks through Kento's defensive barriers. They finally both apologize for those past assumptions. And this brilliantly illustrates the core character arc here. Just look at the contrast. Back then, we had a dynamic entirely defined by running away, leaving without a word, always assuming the worst. But now, we see a real commitment to honesty. They make a pact to stop assuming and to start actually sharing their feelings. It is profound emotional growth, and it's achieved simply by looking at each other and talking. Who would have thought?
So, where does this leave our chaotic cast of characters? Let's summarize this heartwarming new normal. Kento doesn't go back to being their housekeeper. Instead, he continues working for other clients, keeping a really healthy professional boundary. However, he now visits the Ogawas purely as a friend. They spend their time cooking together, enjoying each other's company without that super awkward power dynamic of employer and employee. Of course, it's still slightly chaotic, as the sisters now openly and playfully tease him about the idea of sharing his affection.
Which leaves us with this final hilarious predicament. He's stopped running, he's opened his heart, and he's really embraced honesty. But if honesty means all three of his exes, who, remember, happen to be sisters, are actively demanding his attention and trying to literally spoon-feed him dinner, how long can Kento realistically survive this new, loving, yet incredibly overwhelming reality? It's a perfectly provocative thought that leaves us thoroughly entertained, highlighting how beautifully this story blends emotional growth with absolute romantic chaos.